Back in '95, going back now, Jim was managing the Malaway-Elmwood provincial campaign. Now we're going back. I believe I was working on the Rossmere E-date there, and we Rossmereites later referred to that election as the Jets election. You political insiders here will recall that election. With 25 or so years as a member of the Rossmere NDP, I could verify there was a friendly rivalry between the two NDP constituency associations, with our Rossmere southern borders and Elmwood's northern borders moving back and forth like the World War I trenches on the Western Front, every census and redistribution. There was one event where Elmwood, led by Jim Bardy, faked a break-in at the back of our Rossmere headquarters on Henderson. Their incursion took them a couple of blocks north of the border. And we knew it was Bardy, we knew it was Jim. I think they left some old Elmwood signs there. Well, the pranking stopped when a day later, the Rossmere election headquarters was really broken into. And there was real damage. And I recall telling the Winnipeg Police Service that we knew for sure it wasn't them. I brought them into the conversation, but you better to visit them and just to make sure. So two could play that game. Not many of you know this, but for a few hours, Jim and Jenny had a big progressive conservative election sign on their yard in the middle of the 2011 provincial election campaign. You probably heard about it. It's true. When we received the report, I thought I'd have some fun with this. After all, there was no question that the sign was there in error. I called up the Transcone NDP headquarters where Jim was working and asked him when he had joined the PCs. And he replied, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, there's a big PC sign on your yard." And he said, "What?" That what made it into my long-term memory. "You gotta be kidding." That wasn't exactly what he said. I think there was an expletive in there somewhere. "Get that thing down." And then he gave me a list of who he was going to call, including the PC campaign managers that he knew. Get that darn thing down. We had fun with that one. But this is something I think that's an illustration of something a bit more. And that was when we went to take the sign down that evening, late that evening, about 9:30, when that's when we put up signs in our area. We got to Jim's house, and there was a crowd there. They had seen the sign, and they knew something was wrong with this picture. And his neighbors, he was on a four corner, and they were all out there watching us dismantle the sign. They knew that the sign was an insult to Jim, and somebody had to do something about it. We had a crowd. I recall a crowd of about 10 people just really wondering, and these are his neighbors, wondering what the heck was going on. Jim was a very empathetic person. Those of us who knew him, and when he'd hear some bad news, some sad news, he was affected by it, and that was a very endearing quality of him. In working for MLAs like Darrell Reid and Jim Malaway, and later, particularly in Jim's MP office, Jim would have helped people with problems daily. And that takes a special kind of diplomacy. And those of us who are in the business, you're not always the diplomat, but when you can get up on that scale, you're doing pretty good. And Jim was certainly that way. In a political environment, you've got to have a healthy sense of humor. And the political news of the day would always be digested by Jim with that filter. He had a good sense of humor about things. In the last few years, we regularly continued our comparing of political notes. Jim, in his retirement, continued to be a keen observer of the current party and news events. The only break in our meetings was the COVID break. And by the way, Jim was the only survivor in his ward in the Maples, where he lived for the past few years. There was a time after COVID when the Maples personal care home wasn't allowed any new residents. And it was one of the spookier experiences I had would be walk down the wing, empty wing, in a Manitoba personal care home, empty wing, and Jim at the end of it. There he was, you know, he'd be on his computer and checking things out. So that was a very vivid recollection. COVID wasn't a problem for him, and he was a fighter to the end. It was a personal blessing to have a chance to say my goodbyes to him in his final hours in the hospital. Sig was there too. And Jim Malloway and Cleely Villa were also grateful to have the chance to say their goodbyes to him as well in the hospital. After all, Jim had touched our lives in a very special way. We will always have fond memories of Jim, which will allow us to keep and carry his spirit with us. Thank you to Jenny and James Jr. For sharing a big part of his life with us.
Thank you.
Thank
Now
you.
I invite Sig Laser, please, to come forward.
Yeah, no, they're mine.
Borrow Randy's reading glasses.
Oh, these aren't reading glasses.
They're not.
I have reading glasses.
You got a pair.
See if we can
handle it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hide behind the lectern
I have reading glasses, Sig.
if I need.
Okay.
And I think I'll just read this. What I wrote here was to maybe hold back some tears. I jotted some things down this morning, and I found that I teared up. I do that quite easily. I think it's age-related. Anyways, my name is Sig Laser, and I'm a friend of Jim Bardy. That's George, Roy, James Bardy. Who knew all the names? And like his multiple names, there were many facets to his personality. I knew Jim one way. It's possible, well, likely, that you knew him in other ways. Over the years, whenever there was a funeral or memorial, and we'd ask Jim if he was going or wanted to come along, he would say, "Nope, I don't do funerals." He could be stubborn. Well, Big Jim, you're not getting around this one. Jim Malloway's Facebook note about Jim says that he moved to Winnipeg in the late 80s. I'm not sure about that, and even Randy, your 1982 date, I don't think so.
Okay.
My recollection is that Ron Cavalucci, a name some of you will remember, brought Jim to Winnipeg in 1983 to work on the NDP municipal election campaign. You know, the one with Brian Corn running for mayor and a whole raft of others, myself in St. Vitel's Glenlawn ward. Jim was assigned to the Glenlawn campaign. So that was October of '83, Randy.
Okay.
So I think Cavalucci brought Bardy in from Hamilton
I know
a half
Cavalucci
year
brought it.
before that, or maybe just before that. How can I be sure of the timing? Well, one way, my son Nathan was just a little guy then, and Jim christened him as the Boo Boo Baby. 40 years on, and Nathan is still my Boo Boo Baby. After that, as years passed, Jim stayed with me over a number of NDP nomination races and probably a couple of campaigns. He was the constant and the center of gravity that kept me grounded and moving forward. Over the years, Jim integrated into Winnipeg and the NDP family, and you likely know him as working for the NDP caucus and also later in Malloway's Elmwood constituency office. In that case, you